Hi, everybody. Welcome to this adult fiction debut panel. I'm so excited for this kind of mishmash of genres, of kind of settings, of everything. So I'm very excited to be chatting, doing another 2024 debut panel. If you don't know who I am, my name's Lily. I am the moderator for this panel. And we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. And then, if we have time at the end, we're open to questions. So if you have any questions during the panel, please put them in the chat and I will remember to get back to them. But now we're going to have the authors introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into the questions that I had. So, LM, could you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm LM Sagas. I'm a sci-fi author. So my debut is Cascade Failure. A little bit of prop. It's a fun sci-fi adventure. It would be for fans if you like Firefly, Becky Chambers, Murderbot. Basically, just a crew of lovable disasters trying to save the universe from a planet-killing computer virus.
I'm Jenny Adams. I'm the author of A Deadly Endeavor, which is a historical murder mystery set in 1920s Philadelphia. It stars a heartbroken socialite who's very Alexis Rose or Elle Woods-esque, who ends up chasing a serial killer with a city coroner and trying not to fall in love in the process.
Very cool. I'm Christine McKellums. My book is too far away to reach, so it's on my shelf. But it's called The Band. It's like upmarket literary fiction about a canceled K-pop boy band who escapes to America and meets an American therapist in an H Mart, but whose reunion ends up sort of spiraling a bunch of increasingly violent interactions between them and their very obsessive fandom that ends in like an award show bombing that changes the nature of the music industry. So not a lot of fun, but a lot of like drama maybe.
I'm J.R. Creedon, and my book is Moondust in My Hairnet. It's a weirdly quiet sci-fi with an autistic main character who's bisexual and polyamorous, and it deals a lot with grief, but when it comes to disability issues or queer issues, those are very soft and joyful. So the grief is the hard part, and the rest is an easy vibe.
So, for my first question, I want to start off with one that I bet you all have gotten so many times, but it's kind of just to tell us about your journey to debut, from what was your first idea of this novel and how did that kind of initial idea change, or I guess not change, throughout the road to publication?
Yeah, so I'll start. We can kind of round robin this. So Cascade Failure actually started off. Right now, it deals with a computer virus, a planet-killing computer virus. Originally, when I started writing it, it was a bioweapon. Unfortunately, that was right around the time that COVID hit. And so I was like, I don't actually know that I want to be writing about this right now. There's enough of that in the real world. And I have a little bit of an IT background. So I was like, okay, we're just going to pivot and we're going to do a computer virus. But most of the characters stayed the same. It was just sort of shifting into more of a technology space more than a biology space, which probably worked to my benefit because I think I took one biology class in like high school, so I probably saved myself a lot of trouble.
That's really funny that you said that, LM, because I also had to shift the focus of A Deadly Endeavor when it first started. It was actually a young adult paranormal mystery set during the 1918 influenza epidemic. Because Philadelphia was like the American epicenter of that, right? And then it was COVID, and then so I was like, oh no, we can't do this. And I shifted it a year, and then it was still too close. And we ended up in 1921. And then I sent the first few chapters to my agent, and she was like, I love this, but it's not YA. And I was like, oh, tell me more. because up until this point, I had written 6 young adult novels and got nowhere. And so I kind of had to pivot a lot, and it has gone through so many different iterations. When it went on submission, it actually still had paranormal elements in it that we took out once it sold. And because my editor was like, I think we need one genre, like paranormal, murder mystery, and historical romance. Like that's not a genre. So it went through a lot of changes, and now it's a mystery. And I like to call myself an accidental mystery author.
Mine started as YA too, and my central plot was a fictional space illness. But the further I got with the draft, I was like, this is too close to real illnesses. And then I got diagnosed as autistic, like as I was drafting, and I was like, oh wait, I have this thing of my own that I need to be exploring, not somebody else's space. So I ended up shifting it, and my plot changed. My main plot changed 4 or 5 times. I even had a cooking contest as the main plot for a while. I had different moon departments that the characters were training in. So many changes. But the characters and the central issue for my main character being around grieving her sister, that like never shifted at all.
Wow. I feel sort of bad because I'm so impressed by how much your guys' stories have like adapted and changed to things happening in the real world or your own lives, because I feel like I didn't do this story at all. And I feel like the lazy author. I guess similar to like LM and Jenny, you guys wrote it like and changed it because of like COVID happenings. I wrote mine like 6 months into COVID. So like I didn't really change it as a function of like what was happening. The only thing I do remember changing during editing, and I wrote it like over a span of 3 months. So I just didn't have, and then I like submitted it and like it went off. So I didn't like do a lot of tweaking. But the one thing I do remember changing during the editing process was that Queen Elizabeth died. And in the original manuscript, I had to like refer to her in the present. I had to like change that. And that was like a silly change. But that's like the only thing I remember. Like, and other than like doing like elaborating on a few plot lines where like doing more of the sort of like what happens at the end, I think I elaborated the ending a little bit. But other than that, there's not a lot of editing, not a lot of like developmental editing plot wise on my end.
All of your debuts are out in the world, and so I wanted to check in on you all and see, how does it feel? Were there any unexpected challenges going through this process and like having it actually be out in the world for everyone to read? I'm curious, want to know how you all feel afterwards.
It still feels so new to me, and I'm still getting used to my readers not being other writers who I can talk to after they read. So I hear from readers from time to time, and like, I don't know where those boundaries are yet. Like, I want to give everyone a hug and like help them through their read, or like send them a thank you card. And like this is still very new.
Yeah, it's weird because like you want something for so long, right? Like I think I sent my first query for my first book in 2010, and this came out, this year. So it's been like a 14-year journey, and you want something for so long, and then it happens, and then you're like, wait, this is like strangers are reading my book. And I know that's been like the point all along, but you live in this reality for so long that is not happening.
Right.
So then when it does, it's so magical, but also it's wild to think that people are having their complete own experience with this world I've created and these characters that have just lived in my head for so long, that I'm not a part of. It's really surreal. I keep pinching myself that it's actually happening.
You guys are so optimistic, because I was talking to another author who is on her like 4th book or something at an author panel I was part of like 2 weeks ago, and she was asking me how post debut life went, and I was like, oh, I don't know. She was like, and she was really honest. She was like, after, because this is her like fourth go around, she was like, every time my book comes out, I go into like a mild clinical depression afterwards. Because she was like, it's so anticlimactic, right? Like this whole what you guys have been talking about, like, and I feel it too. The whole, regardless of how long you spent writing this particular book, all the buildup sort of comes to a peak like on pub day, and then it's sort of like, slows down. And I was like, oh, I could sort of, I don't, like, I wouldn't say I'm depressed or anything, but I do feel like the like all the anticipation does fizzle pretty significantly in the days following pub day. And that I had never even thought about. Like, I pretty much, prior to publication, I just thought about the book up until pub day. I had zero thoughts about like life after pub day. And now that I've actually lived it, I was like, oh, it is sort of like, oh, you have to go back to normal life, which is slightly exciting for me. I like the anticipation of like going up to a publication.
Yeah, I think for me, mine, I don't really have so much of like a general feeling. I was excited for pub day and everything, but like for me, it's more like you have those moments, right? Like even after publication, publication is a huge capital M moment. Oh my gosh, my book is out today. But I think, you have those times where you walk into a bookstore and, oh my gosh, that's my book, like right on the shelf with people that like I would buy their books. Like, that's really cool. Or like, sort of like what JR was saying, someone will message you and say, oh my gosh, I read your book. I loved your book. It had some impact on someone. To me, I think I kind of almost like forget about the book, or that's just sort of like background with everything else in my life. And then you have those moments where it's like, oh yeah, I did that thing, and that's out in the world and people are enjoying it. And I think really it's helped to just focus on those moments and sort of just enjoy the roller coaster ride that is publishing.
Funny too, because I'm like so deep into revising book 2 right now that sometimes someone will say something about book 1 and I'm like, really, that we did that? Oh yeah, we did that. That's the thing. Like, I almost forget.
Kind of on the same wavelength, of what LM was saying. I want to know who is an author who you all have read or turned to when you needed inspiration, or an author that you found inspiration in the past.
Yeah, I'll field this one first. To me, honestly, so, I have those authors that kind of got me into writing generally. Like I was a Jim Butcher fanatic when I was in high school. And actually, I started writing in urban fantasy before I switched over to sci-fi. But in terms of like, if I'm really looking for inspiration, I'm in a rut, or, I want to make myself feel like writing the next project. Usually, and I don't know if this is going to sound bad, usually I turn on the TV, because my problem is when I'm reading someone else's writing, if I'm looking for vibes or if I'm looking for inspiration, my problem is sometimes I focus too much on the writing itself. And, I don't think that helps me focus on the things that I want to be focusing on. I'm thinking about, oh man, that turn of phrase was awesome. Instead of, oh, I need this kind of vibe, or, let's go for something upbeat. So usually I'll switch on. Killjoys was really big when I was writing Cascade Failure, and then Expanse came through. So I usually just put on a movie or turn on the TV because it lets me shut my brain off a little bit and just sort of focus on the vibes.
I do the same thing, LM. Like I have books that I love. Like I love Deanna Raybourn, and I love I've read The Wheel of Time like maybe like 20 times. Like that's like my like comfort. Like I read that when I was like 11 for the first time. It was like my Harry Potter for other people, And I'm a school librarian, so I'm reading all the time for like work, and TV is really, I think, where I get a lot of my like, oh, I love this character, or oh, these are like the vibes that I want. When I was drafting A Deadly Endeavor, I was watching a lot of Schitt's Creek and Ted Lasso and Peaky Blinders and Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, like all these things that I really love, and a lot of it made its way into the book.
I do that too when I'm writing, but when I need when I need word inspiration, I go back to my first favorite author, which was Tom Robbins, because his work is so bizarre and fun, and it's so absurdist. There's no way it's going to overlap anything I'm working on. It's going to send my brain in like very far directions, so that I come back feeling like I've just woken up on an alien planet, or I've been like dunked in syrup. Like it's just this weird feeling that you get from his work. Um, I think I've read all of his works probably 20 times too, along with Wheel of Time.
I love your metaphor of like being dunked in syrup. I've never heard of that before, but I like it. I think it's changed a lot for me, like who got me writing. I think someone else said this, I can't remember who gets you writing versus who like sustains you, like once you've written stuff. So like back in the day, like, I don't know, 10 plus years ago when I first started writing, I think it was Junot Diaz's short story collection, This Is How You Lose Her, that got me like writing fiction for the first time, because I had just never heard a voice like that before. But then since then, I like the comparison to like TV characters, because for me recently, like as I'm working on like my next project, a lot of TikTok videos give me inspiration, because I feel like there's so many characters, like more than other forms of social media, like more than like Instagram or Twitter/X or definitely Facebook. I feel like TikTok has a lot of like fictionalized characters almost on them, where like creators are taking on like not necessarily themselves, but characters of their own creation that are sort of maybe they're doppelgangers or some version of themselves. And I just find it enormously appealing and funny. So I know it's also a time suck, so TikTok can also stand in the way of me ever writing anything again. But when it's good and when it's really funny, I oftentimes get inspiration from there too.
You're on a much better side of TikTok than I am. I'm stuck in paranormal TikTok.
That's true. Sometimes the algorithm changes for me, and then I'm like, where did my content go?
Mine is all baby zoo animals, because my 6-year-old is like obsessed with zoo TikTok.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that was a thing. Now I'm going to
It is the best side of TikTok.
Oh, I love that.
I feel like this is a conversation that is one that people have a lot now, but it's kind of like, what hashtags can you search to trick your algorithm into showing you like putting you in that rabbit hole for like a different side of TikTok, or like a different, niche interest that you'll have for like 2 weeks, and then you'll want to only watch that, and like that's it.
Yes, exactly.
I would love to ask some questions that kind of pair books together and like dive into themes a little bit more. I also want to remind people that if you have any questions, then put them in the chat. I first want to start off by talking about Cascade Failure and Moondust in My Hairnet, because both of those sci-fis are not only both sci-fis, but they also have kind of, it got me thinking, because they have these summaries that definitely give us like found friends, crew dynamic vibes, which I think are very emblematic of sci-fi as a genre. So I wanted to know, for both of you as writers, could you please tell us about some of the side characters and sort of why you gravitate towards themes like that, which I think are such a joy in the sci-fi genre. And like when I think of sci-fi, I always think of kind of at least one of those two, plot pieces, if not both.
Okay. I'll go first. So with Cascade Failure, it actually started with the characters. Like I knew before I ever had any idea what I wanted the plot to be or the setting to be, I knew I had this one character that I really wanted to write. And I was like, okay, well, who would be a good contrast for this character? Okay, so this character. Well, this character needs like 2 foil characters, because he's just got a lot of stuff going on right now. So he's got to have like his friends too. And so they kind of formed sort of in a vacuum before I even started putting together the story. And then, as I was putting together the story, I was thinking through, I could just tell it from that original character's point of view, but I thought it would be actually kind of fun to do multiple points of view. So to take each of those characters and tell the story from each of their different perspectives, because you've got a character who was a minor and is now sort of on the run from the law kind of thing, and his perspective is going to be very different from the whip sharp medic mechanic who likes to sass off, and she's seen a different side of the universe, and so you almost have 5 different stories going on just because the perspectives are so different. You've got your sort of military-esque commanding officer, you've got the miner, you've got the medic mechanic, you've got their AI captain, who is very much humanized in a way, but sort of a unique spin on it. And then you've got a programmer. And so taking all of those different perspectives and telling the story that way was really fun. And also getting to do those character relationships, because these are, some characters you're like, these guys would generally not get along, but you stick them on a ship and give them a mission and they kind of got to get along. And then it sort of grows into more as it goes.
I started with my characters first too. I knew my main character would have a found family situation, being polyamorous and kind of joining her and her boyfriend with another trio. But then I wanted them to have mentors. And as I think the queer community, we rely so much on our elders and like letting us know what's safe and what they've been through. And so having that in this world, I was like, well, of course they'd be a whole department. And I kind of imagined them like the lone gunman from X-Files, just like the super weird elder nerds that are solving all the problems in the background. And they've pretty much given up on the world except for each other. And, they expect things. They don't know that this intentional community on the moon is going to work out, but they're like, well, we're here. At least we're together. Let's, make everything as fun as we can. And I think that attitude is so good. Just that, they find their fun and they're disabled and they've been through the ringer. They've been through an apocalypse. And so at this point, they're like, all right, well, let's make the best of whatever we're doing. At least we have each other.
I would love to talk about the band and specifically the celebrity culture and the way in which you talk about kind of power and freedom and not having power and freedom, also while being a celebrity and also not while being a celebrity. So I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship your characters have with fame and celebrity status in your book. And I was also wondering if you had to do kind of research into how celebrity culture worked on the inside or like from that perspective as well.
Yeah. So, I feel like one of the taglines for the book that I don't think we ended up using is this idea that celebrity is a disease, but everyone wants contamination, right? That like if you actually like in interviews and like memoirs that I've read of, people who have one form of celebrity or other, they oftentimes do talk about just how traumatizing the actual experience of like extraordinary fame is, of like not being able to leave the house, of not being able to like live your life, of essentially being constantly threatened with like things that destroy your self-esteem or that like invade your privacy, and how it's a very sort of abnormal way of living that our brains, I don't think weren't built for, and essentially sets you up, I feel like, for all sorts of mental health disorders when you're constantly being exposed to these kind of stimuli. So I think that was part of it. But at the same time, I think in this day more than ever, a lot of people still really want it, right? That I think, part of social media is this idea that everyone has this maybe notion that they could go viral overnight, or that they would want to even make content that might go viral overnight. So I think there's that tension there that like it's something that a lot of people want, and yet people who've gone through it, they don't seem to be having a great time at it. But in terms of the research, I've talked about this in my other like platforms, but the novel itself is obviously very much inspired by like BTS, who's probably the most well-known K-pop phenomenon of the day. And so I wouldn't even call it research. I would just call it like fangirling is the extent of the research that I did, because I was like watching. I discovered BTS right before I started. Like they were literally the inspiration for this book. And so I was essentially writing the novel while also consuming all the content they had like uploaded for years and years before I had figured out who they were. So a lot of it was based on like real life dramas that had happened, not just with them, but within the larger like K-pop realm of, interactions with fandoms gone wrong, or, dramas with producers and music production companies, and like hierarchies and like underdogs versus top dogs. So I guess technically it's research, but it's way more fun than like normal research that I have to do.
For like hours listening to music and like watching interviews and stuff.
Yeah, I know, it's so hard.
Yeah. Speaking of research, I wanted to also ask about A Deadly Endeavor, since, as you mentioned, like your setting had changed in terms of sort of when it was set. So I wanted to know if you could take us through your research process, and if you have any facts or research you wanted to use but then couldn't use. Because I really love when people have like sort of somewhat obscure thing wanted to use but could never figure out a way to describe like the 5 different types of daggers everybody had.
Yeah, so the research into 1920s Philly was a lot. I don't think I quite knew what I was getting myself into when I started writing it. Everything I wrote before this was fantasy. A lot of it was like historical fantasy, so I was working with facts, but also making a lot of stuff up along the way. I couldn't really do that with historical fiction. I mean, there's some things that are just like vibes, but most of it had to be really correct. Like I had to figure out were windshield wipers on a car in 1921, and if so, like how did they work? um, there were things like if you fire a 22 caliber handgun in a dumbwaiter, like how long would your hearing be affected? Um, all of these things that I was like, just like these like tiny things that really maybe are like in the book for like a line. Take took hours of research. I actually just did a presentation at the school I used to teach at in Philadelphia, which is the school Edie went to, in my brain. And I was talking with the kids about how do you do research. I'm a librarian, so I like got to librarian at them, and I was like, you have to start with, what do I already know? What questions do I still have? And what resources do I need to find the answers to those questions? And I relied extensively on the digitized maps collection at the Free Library of Philadelphia. I had to figure out, how was I going to get how were I going to get my characters like on the trolley routes between Manayunk and Chestnut Hill and Center City. I didn't know what the zoo looked like in 1921. They're actually like digitized home films of a trip to the Philadelphia Zoo in 1922, and I was like, that's close enough. Like, let's do that. Temple University's Urban Archives was another really big resource. And I read a lot of books too. Like there are just a lot of books about flappers, about 1920s culture, just about this like these huge seismic shifts that were happening in the United States at that time. But like I said, I'm a librarian, and my husband is a historian, so uh, it was stuff that I liked to do. And it's also really handy to like poke him and be like, hey, if someone needed to be electrocuted in the trenches during World War One, like where would that have happened? He's like, oh, the German trenches, like immediately, like so. Yeah, it was fun.
It's fun to have like a real life fact checker.
He is very useful. Oh, but one thing that didn't make it in, I forgot to say that. So when I went on submission, I like kind of it was much more like historical romance and like spice levels than it currently is. And I did a lot of research on like men's underwear in the 1920s, which was one piece. It was like I had to figure out how I was going to get Gilbert out of this, and then that whole scene got cut, so I didn't get to share my knowledge.
I want to ask as well about Cascade Failure since it's part of a series. And so, another one of my check ins, I just want to know how the process of writing um, the sequel, how it how it was going or how it is going, depending on the stage of that. And if there were any unexpected changes to the plot or characters in book two because of book one. I know some people have written like they have a good sense of what happens in book two before they even start book one, or I know it varies. So I wanted to know about both of those.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe mine is kind of an interesting case, or maybe it's sort of indicative of a shift in publishing. But they really wanted to get the books out very close together. So Cascade came out in March, and the second book, Gravity Lost, is actually coming out next month. So basically, they had me turn in sort of my sort of developmental edits for book one, and then just write book two. So I like entered a fugue state for about 3 months, cranked out the second book and dropped it on their laps. And so I was actually kind of editing them in tandem. And so instead of book two having changes based on book one, I actually got to go back into book one and like seed a few things from book two. Sort of reverse engineered some plots that were going to come in bigger in book two. So it was a very rapid process, which might be why like I don't have a lot of recollections of feelings at the time. I just kind of like panic drafted an entire book and hoped that it made sense by the end. But yeah, it was an interesting process because it happened so fast together. It was almost like it was all just one book and we split it up. Obviously Cascade was submitted as a standalone with series potential, with buzzwords. So it didn't have to have a book two, but they wanted one. And so we just kind of shoved it all together, drafted it, and threw it out the door. And it comes out next month, which is kind of trippy. So
fast.
So yeah, that's how that went. It was a ride.
I thought releasing like them a year apart was like fast, but like a few months. Oh my gosh, I'm in awe of you.
Yeah, I think at least I don't know how other publishers do it, but I think my publisher has done that with a couple of series as well, because there's another fantasy debut series that comes out this year, and I think those are only like a few months apart, the book one and the book two. Because I think the idea is, because like you read the first book and you're like, oh man, I want to like read the next book right now. And I think it's sort of that almost binge culture that we get from all the streaming services. Like, I'm just going to wait until all the episodes are up and then just watch them. It's kind of like that, but in book form.
I don't even know how to react to what I just heard. Yeah. I know what you're saying. I understand like this idea of wanting to like have the second book out really quickly, but I feel like, people in my life who are not really, don't know about the publishing process and don't know how long it takes, like, to be published and everything. They'll be like, oh, I'm like, why isn't the second book out? Why isn't like the rest of it out? And it's like, you don't even know how much time it's taken. Like what you're reading. Someone was asking me the other day, they're like, oh, how can they know when they like buy a book that they're going to get 2 books or like they're going to get a series if they're not written yet? I was like, oh, okay. Let me just now explain like all these other things behind the scenes about how it all works to like understand why it takes so little time. Normally, some people will say, oh yeah, I've been cooking, I've been thinking about it for a while and I already had it, but not that like they had to rush draft like the second book all at once in a couple of months.
Yeah, I think they actually, because I didn't even have like a synopsis or anything for the second book, because I didn't want to get my hopes up, because I was like, I want to play around in this universe some more, but like I'm gonna manage my expectations. And they're like, could you have a synopsis to us in like a few weeks? Like, and my publishing team was great. Like I love my editor, and if I needed more time, I'm confident they would have given it to me. But it was fun actually. Like it was a lot at times, but it was really fun. And like hopefully it comes through in the book. But yeah, it's not like I would avoid doing that at all costs. If people are authors, like I think hopefully it'll work out, and it's pretty good.
Did it sell as 2 books, or was it just like, or was it like you sold the first one and then they were like, oh, by the way, like how did that?
Yes. So we went on submission with like the full first book and did the whole like, if people that are familiar with publishing will be familiar with this phrase, standalone with series potential, which basically means like it could be its own book, but if someone wants to buy more, I can write some more. And so they were like, yeah, we would like to do 2 books. We would like to hang out with this crew a little bit longer. And so the contract was actually for that book, and then the sequel, which was at the time unnamed, which I think is how a lot of things go, because at the time that it was contracted for, I'm like, I don't even know. I can't name it for sure. I don't even know what it's going to be about. But yeah, cool stuff, fun stuff.
I want to now ask about the mysteries that both Moondust in My Hairnet and A Deadly Endeavor have, because I'd love to know sort of how you plot that, how you plot clues, red herrings, other mystery elements in the story, and if you have or had any resources you found helpful with kind of structuring that and could share or wanted to share.
I didn't do much different than I do for any other like story element. I mean, I used Scrivener and I plotted things out along with my outline. Like I followed what clues would be discovered when and by whom. Now, one thing I did have to do though, when it gets to the climactic events where I have these huge groups of people, I had to make little tiny pieces of paper with everybody's names so that I could group them all together and like see who is where and who's doing what, to just like maintain in my own mind what's happening and how much is happening at the same time. But I struggle with that with every story. The more people, the more little pieces of paper I'm having to label and like move around as I'm writing.
So A Deadly Endeavor did not start life really as a mystery. I plotted it like a romance, with all like the romance beats, and they just kept finding these dead bodies. And like it got way gorier than I thought it was going to be. Um, so at one point I asked my agent, like, how gross am I allowed to get? And she's like, not that gross. And I'm like, I'm just going to try it. And all of the grossness has stayed in, which I was like excited about. But my editor was fantastic because she saw the seeds of this when it was on submission. And she was like, okay, this is going to be a mystery. And this is how we write a mystery. And you're going to have to layer in these things. And I've always been a huge mystery reader. When I was a kid, like I just inhaled Nancy Drew and Boxcar Children and like every Agatha Christie. And even as I've gotten, become a grown up, I've read a lot of mysteries and they're a really deep thriller phase. So I think just reading a lot and like you kind of instinctively start to know the beats, and like when things have to be revealed, or at least that it felt like it. Like it was like, oh, okay, this makes sense here. This is, you read so much that you really start to recognize what's happening in the genre. I also, again, relied a lot on TV mysteries. I might have the TV habits of like an 80-year-old woman. I watch a lot of those like British murder, like half-hour murder mysteries, like Death in Paradise and everything. And like you see how these things are, they unravel. And I thought that would mean writing book 2 would be a lot easier because I was like, oh, I know I'm writing a mystery this time, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plan out my red hair, and I'm going to plan out the big reveals. And that was a lie that I had told myself. Like it's not any easier when you know you're writing a mystery to pull off the mystery. So as far as resources, I just went to a mystery conference called Malice Domestic, and I learned so much from all these amazing authors that were there. It's all like the traditional mystery. And there's a really great book. What is it? How to Write a Mystery by Lee Child and the Mystery Writers of America. I actually got this because I was requesting all these books from the library on poisons, because book 2 is about poisons. But I was like, oh, I really don't want anyone to worry about me. So I requested the mystery to also be put on hold. And it's really actually, I've been reading it and it's very helpful. So this would be a good one.
All the things that people would ask you if they could see like your writing search history.
I'd be in big trouble.
Christine, I wanted to ask you in the band, because as I was reading the band, in the synopsis, I thought that I would find myself, more captivated by like the K-pop celebrity kind of. But what I really loved, and I would love to ask you about in terms of side characters and other characters, were actually the music producer. And also the obviously like this mysterious woman that he meets in H Mart, because I felt like those glimpses into those, and I think it helps because they're obviously viewing fame from very different angles. The three of them are all have different opinions about fame and what you should do with them. So I wanted to know how it was to create those characters and those looks at kind of the main, at the K-pop fan, not the K-pop fan, sorry, the K-pop idol.
Yeah. So the music producer was inspired by like the actual music producer behind like Hype before it became like big hit. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, like, but Bong Si-hyuk, like Hitman Bang or whatever people call him. So like when I first found out about him, and like he's like the classic underdog story, right? Like he was this guy who was not part of like the big three like music production agencies in South Korea, but who started his own like relatively small indie agency and ended up signing BTS at a time when like hip hop in K-pop was not really a thing. Like K-pop was very much a machine and hip hop was very much like an American thing, but he really melded the two. And so I've always been fascinated by like the real version of that person. And so like the music producer in the book is largely inspired by like my imagination of what he might be like. And I don't know anything about him obviously, but other than like what I read online, but is the fictionalized version is just inspired by this notion that like a man who loves music but who went against like all the social norms could create something really successful, but also be haunted by what happens when you create something really successful and then it is outside of your control, right? Because like once you put it out there, similar to the experience of creating a book, like once you put it out there, you can't really control how people react to it or how they interpret it or what they like or don't like. So that was like the inspiration for him. And then the narrator, the woman in the H part, a lot of her perspective just came from like what I do in my daily life as like a social psychologist and like dealing with mental health and like teaching about it to students. So a lot of the things that she talks about is just stuff I talk about in class anyway. Obviously, I try to make her character more interesting by like making her super snarky and like unhappily married and older than this like K-pop boy bander who ends up living in this house. So I wanted to make their dynamic different enough that it didn't come off as like this meet cute setup where you're expecting the two of them to like go off in the sunset or anything like that. So yeah, that was probably the ways in which those characters came together.
Yeah, I found it interesting what you said about the meet cute thing, because it's like I knew it was coming, obviously, since I read the synopsis. But even when I was reading it, I was still like, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. Like I knew it was going to happen, but it felt so much different than, how you're expecting it to be and like how you think that that's going to play out. And then it does. And you're like, well, I have questions. Why? Why? But like, I know it was coming, but I'm still so shocked.
Yeah, like I don't like one of the things I dislike about some like I don't read a lot of like romance in books. I do occasionally watch like rom-coms like in movies. And one of the things I hate about anything I watch or read is like if I know what's coming, if I can sort of see the future because the setup is sort of like frequently done, I just get very irritated because I'm like, oh, if I know how the book is going to end, I don't need to read the rest of it. If I know how the movie is going to end, I don't need to sit here for another like 90 minutes. So whenever I write stuff, I try to do things that are a little like, where you're like, I'm not sure where this is going. So that's the goal. I don't know if it ever delivers, but yes, that's definitely what I'm aiming for.
I want to ask you all when did you know you wanted to become a writer? And if now that you're published has changed your perception, I'm sure it has changed your perception of what a writer does. But I mean, like, if it's changed your perception of what a writer does, or like how you feel looking back at like that initial spark of when you wanted to become a writer.
I knew I wanted to write as soon as I could read for myself, and I was 3. But then I read a lot of biographies about artists. So I think long before writing my first real novel, I had a pretty good view of, the cost that it would have, and how slow and unlikely success is. But you can still publish, you can still do your work. That doesn't mean it's going to it doesn't mean you'll be a household name. So I think I had a pretty good understanding going into publishing that what kind of world it was. And I'm glad for that. Otherwise, it might be a little bit daunting to be on the side of it.
I popped off screen because I wanted to grab my like stack of notebooks that I rescued from my mother's house from like 4th grade. That I have like whole chapter books written in these notebooks that I used to write instead of paying attention in school. And now that I'm a teacher, I know that all of my teachers knew exactly what I was doing, but I thought I was like so slick. And that's what I always wanted to write. From like the minute I could pick up a pencil, I was writing stories. I never thought I could actually do it. Like I didn't meet an author until after I graduated from college, so I didn't realize that this was a thing that like real people could do. Like in my head, authors were these mythical beings who sat at these beautiful desks and like turned out these amazing things, which is like true. Like we all are making these beautiful books. But it was like I could never do that. It wasn't until after I graduated college and I read like 300 books that year because I had a super long commute and I was really lonely. I just like read and read and read, and I was like, actually, like I think I could do this. And I started going to author events and meeting authors, and that's when it became a thing that I was like, this I want to hold my book. It went from like these are my notebooks to like this is a thing that I really want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess mine is kind of a similar story. Grew up reading a ton, and a little bit for me, it was reading so many books. They were always like really close to what I wanted, but that didn't quite scratch the itch. And so I was like, oh, I really like this, but it's missing this, or oh, I really love this story, but it's missing this thing. And sort of realizing for myself that like, okay, well, if you want a story that's going to have everything that you want in it, then you better sit down at this dinky old computer that really only does Microsoft Paint, Solitaire, and Word, and just write it. And so that was kind of where that came from, was just really wanting to do it so that I could read it. And then that sort of evolved over the years into, okay, well, I've written it. Okay, well, my friend will read it, and my friend says, oh, it's good, because, friends always say, oh, that's good. And then just sort of step by step evolving into, okay, well, a few friends liked it, maybe I'll try and get an agent. Agents liked it. Okay, maybe I'll take it on submission. And it was sort of a journey of progression, I guess, just going from that one decision to write the book that I wanted to read to, oh crap, maybe some other people want to read this book that I wrote that I wanted to read as well. And that's where we are.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about this idea of like wanting to see yourself in a book or seeing books of a certain kind that don't already exist. And I feel like that's a very like a recent thing for me. Like growing up, I obviously knew I wanted to write just like all of you, like as a kid. But yeah, I think like as an adult, now that I'm reading more like stuff that's contemporary, I think it's easier to see the gaps of the literature and like how people are represented. So I think absolutely for me, like I read, for example, a lot of like Asian American lit, but oftentimes I find that like it's easy to like for them to fall into like certain categories, and I don't necessarily see like representation doesn't always come in like one flavor, and I always want to see like more flavors of ways in which you see like different groups of people like just living normal lives or like extraordinary lives, but not necessarily with the same storylines over and over again. So
Right.
that's definitely like one thing that like motivates me to write. And the other thing that I've changed my mind on is like, I think at least one of you mentioned like the mythical status of being an author. Like I used to think even as an adult that the ideal author is a person who writes full time, and now I don't think that anymore. I'm like, it's too unstable to write full time. Like I cannot hand the financial stress of like if I didn't have like a real job, like a day job, I would not be able to handle the financial stress of like the instability of publishing and like waiting for people to email you back. Like it's not good for my mental health. So I love having like a normal job that, you know, has like health insurance and like pays me on time every time. So that part I've changed my mind on. It's probably the biggest thing that I've changed my mind on.
I would love to know if all of your books were the same title from when they were drafted to how they were when they were released.
Mine's been the same since the very first chapter that I wrote. In fact, the first chapter is almost exactly the same, even though everything else has changed. It was sort of like the thing that set the tone for what I wanted to achieve. And then it was, what else do I have to change to make it fit this sort of weird, quirky tone of Moondust in my hairnet?
I love that. Mine too.
I found out the title for A Deadly Endeavor when I saw the final cover. It went through many changes. It started as a modern girl's guide to spirits because there were ghosts and I liked the pun with prohibition. And then it became a modern girl's guide to murder once we took the ghosts out. And then it actually sold as a modern girl's guide to murder. And then I got all these trolls on Goodreads who were like accusing me of plagiarizing A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. And so my publisher was, I mean, like one starring like hundreds of them that like Goodreads ended up taking down. It was bananas. So they asked me, they're like, if you have 10 titles that you might like, and I was like, 10? That's a lot. And I'm really bad with titles. So my things were like Edie Shippen and the Schuylkill Slasher. And my team was like, no one will be able to pronounce Schuylkill unless you're from Philadelphia. Like, we can't do that. I was like, you know, Murder John. Like, I was like coming up with all these Philadelphia puns, and they were like, stop. No. But then we settled on a Thoroughly Modern Murder, which I was obsessed with. And then the marketing team thought that Thoroughly was too hard to spell for SEO purposes, like search engine optimization. So then they settled on A Deadly Endeavor, and I think Endeavor is harder to spell than Thoroughly because, but it's grown on me. I like it a lot, and amazingly, book 2, like they took the first thing I went with, and we are sticking with it.
Wow,
it was a journey.
Yeah, so Cascade Failure was not always Cascade Failure. I wrote it and took it on submission, and it was purchased as the Dead World Code. And that's because that's the name of the planet-killing computer virus. But my editor, again, I love my editor, but she was like, so this sounds like an episode of something, like the Ambit Crew and the Dead World Code. And so she's like, can we do something that sounds more like a title of something that is its own thing and not, you know, an episode of Firefly? And I was like, that's excellent. Do you have ideas? Because I am terrible with titles. I either think of it sort of like JR as I start writing it, or I will never think of it, and it will never have a title. It will sit on my computer as like some random pronoun just so that I know how to find it. So thankfully, my editor is a genius and came up with cascade failure, which is a variation on the tech term cascading failure, which is like one thing goes wrong and it causes something else to go wrong, and on and on and on, which is very appropriate for the book, and also just sounds cool. So it's that. And then I actually did think of the title for Gravity Lost. That one was me. And I came up with it as I started writing the book. Like, it had a title as I sent over the synopsis. And that is still the title. And unless I am in for a very large surprise that is going to be the title when it comes out, that would be very interesting. Surprise. But yeah, so that was there. Yeah, poor Jenny.
The last question I want to end on is, what is your favorite, or I guess favorite / most useful, but perhaps they're not the same, writing tip that you've gotten or that you know of?
Write for
Change
yourself.
something. Oh, sorry, go ahead, JR.
It's okay. Write for yourself.
Yeah, so mine would be change something. You know, if something isn't working, do something different. And that's not necessarily, okay, you're writing a transition and you hate it and you're pulling your hair out, so write a different transition. Sometimes for me, that's, okay, I got some writer's block and I'm staring at a blank Word document. Okay, I'm just going to pull out pen and paper and try it that way. So just, you know, don't keep beating your head against the wall. If something isn't working, there's probably a reason it's not working. And either, you know, you're really tired, you need a nap, and this is not the time to write, or you just need to do something different. So that's, you know, don't be afraid to change things up.
Mine is similar. I took a fast drafting course, and one of the things that we were told was there are infinite versions of your book, right? Like, there are infinite versions of the way this story can be told. And right now you are telling one of them. And that, like, just internalizing that let me be open to all of the changes that ended up being a deadly endeavor. Like, it started off so far from this vision that I originally had. And if I had stayed married to that initial vision, I wouldn't have this book that I'm really proud of and that I love a whole lot. And so just like, there are infinite ways to tell your story. Like, just be open to the possibilities.
I love that. I think my advice is probably similar, but just from a reading standpoint. Like, whenever I have writer's block, I find that the most helpful thing is to read, but also read outside my genre to like expand my ideas of like how to write and like what kind of plots are out there and like what's viable. Because I find like some of my favorite books like are cross genre, and and I know some of you do that too, like in your own writing, where you're not just one thing. And I find that it's like, even if you don't like it, like sometimes I'm reading something, I'm like, this is not my style. Like, this is not my jam, but I appreciate what the author is doing in terms of the story they're telling and how they're going about telling their story. And I feel like there's things that like all writers can learn, even if they're reading something that they wouldn't like normally enjoy. So that's been like really helpful for me.
Well, thank you everyone so much. Everyone's links for the books are in the description box below for the panel. So definitely go get them, grab them, review them, post about them, do all the amazing things for them. I hope that everyone has a really great rest of your day. Thank you to everyone who is watching. Thank you to the panelists who are joining me. And yeah, I hope everyone has a really great rest of their day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Lily. Bye.